Pete, yeah, very warm welcome and thanks for joining us. You came out to our coaches conference at Reading Football Club probably a couple of years ago now, and Rich has had all sorts of emails of people asking when you're coming back, and we thought we'd contact you to see if you'd join us on the podcast live, which you have. So we're very, very grateful. So yeah, and you've obviously brought your followers with you as well, because we normally get about 5 or 6 people, Rich, don't we, on these? And now it's bumped right up.
Yeah,
We get a few more than that, but and we've also got some coaches from Springfield, Western Massachusetts, joining us tonight as well. I think there's about 7 or 8 on there, so very warm welcome. Pete, we'll get on to the foundation phase and everything in a minute, but just for those who don't know you, if you can just give us an idea of your sort of current role in the game.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough. I think I've got the best job in the world. So I lead on all things foundation phase at the Football Association, and that really deals with children from 5 through to 11 or 12, and wherever you split it. I'm happy to have a grand land grab and try to take on the under 12s as well, but technically it's those aged between 5 and 11.
Brilliant. And I'd be interested to see where your journey started, because I think our paths crossed when I joined the skills program after exiting the pro game. Were you a PE teacher?
No.
In your previous life? Oh,
I have taught PE, but I wasn't. I'm a qualified English teacher rather than a qualified PE teacher.
Right. Okay. So yeah, how did you get into that then?
Well, look, I mean, when I was looking back at my career, I don't know whether it's a career or just a series of fabulous experiences. When I look back at the very start, what I realized that I've had lots of different jobs and I've had lots of different experiences. So if we talk about volume and variety for our young children, I think my journey as a coach has included lots of volume, because I've done it a lot, but there's also been a huge variety. I was a market trader. I am a qualified engineer. I worked in a brass foundry. I painter and decorator, teacher, lecturer, and then alongside that, I became a player coach, volunteer coach, part-time coach, and then full-time coach, obviously, the last 15, 20 years.
And do you think all those experiences, the jobs that you alluded to then, have really helped you and put you in good stead for sort of where you are now and the job that you're doing now?
Absolutely. Even the roles that really didn't, you'd think there isn't really a connection. So I did a 5-year apprenticeship as an engineer, and what that taught me was about planning, about precision, about it did fit in with my personality, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist anyway, but it was about getting things right. So even now, I thank my lucky stars that, you know, when I wasn't lucky enough to be a professional footballer, my dad says, I've already got you a job and you're going to work with me. So that was a fait accompli, but I thank my lucky stars.
Yeah. And when you first started getting into football coaching then, who was it that inspired you on your journey?
There's been a few, and for different reasons. Obviously, Dick Bate was a very close friend, and I always looked up to him, even though on my A license he actually said, "Pete, you're having too much fun." And I said, well, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? So I forgave him for that, but he's obviously one to really aspire to. Steve Rutter, great detail and great manner, and really was able to breathe energy into a session just by his demeanour and his body language. And then my link up with John Allpress was probably pivotal. Both in my development and certainly my philosophy. He asked me as an itinerant, because I wasn't working at the FA then, to come and work with him on the Youth Coaches Award, the very first one. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? And he said, Pete, if I had to tell you what to do, you wouldn't be the right person to work alongside me. And
Wow.
I'd never really experienced that before.
Yeah.
And I just felt so empowered just by those few sentences that, you know, it really did release me and made me committed to, if someone puts that much trust in you, you really want to do a good job. So John was really influential.
Okay. And I just want to touch on what the game, or certainly coaching, what did that look like when you first started getting into it? So yeah, I mean, what's your thinking? So my experience was with, I'm sure you know, Jim Kelman, probably 1996, around that time. You know, it's very structured and very, I have to say, very dissimilar to nowadays.
Yeah.
I just wondered what your experience was like in the early days.
I would say it's probably exactly the same. I got quite obsessive about getting the A license, partly because I was working at Derby County at the time, full time, as their assistant academy director, to John Peacock, who was also a really positive influence upon me. And I remember in some of the practices, and one that I was asked to deliver, you know how you set the practice up and then the ball goes from player A to player B, and then when it's on its way, I found myself shouting, "Stop, stand still."
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I know that's the formula, but that guy hasn't made a decision yet. So what advice can I give him? Because I don't know what to base it upon, because he hasn't touched the ball yet. Yeah. And that really started some cracks in my interrogation of, well, is what Coach Ed looks like at the moment really what it should look like and can look like?
Yeah. Which leads me on to the next question. Actually, it was about barriers, and just to see if there were any barriers in your sort of journey coming through, because I'd imagine you to always have been that sort of progressive, dynamic, pioneering coach, very innovative, and have these fantastic ideas. What was that like? Were there any barriers put in front of you?
Yes, I'm a Walsall supporter for my sins, and I knew I needed to get some experience of working. I'd worked in grassroots, but I needed to work with some players who were slightly ahead of the curve, supposedly, at the Centre of Excellence at Walsall. So I was lucky enough to get a volunteer's job there, and I was there for 5 years. So I bought my own balls, my own cones, my own equipment. And then after 5 years, the club said, Pete, we need you to leave. Because in those 5 years, I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, saying, we could do this. Can it not look like this? Or why don't we change this? And eventually the club that I was volunteering for and I'm in love with actually said, Pete, you got to go. So I don't know whether that was an indictment of myself or where the club was at the time or where coach education and player development was at the time. But I obviously left.
Yeah. What's your advice to somebody? Because obviously I'm out delivering level 1s and 2s and UEFA Bs, and I'm hearing coaches all the time share similar experiences and how they deal with the external factors and the sort of stakeholders in their clubs. You know, and a lot of forward-thinking coaches that we see on these courses that are saying, Mark, I'm just sort of banging my head against the wall here. I've got all these ideas. What sort of advice would you have for those coaches, Pete?
Well, I know for me, I needed to get better at knowing when to bend instead of, you know, really pushing back against it, and knowing when to go any further in a particular direction would be in direct opposition to what I truly believed. And I think it's this dilemma all of the time, because I don't think I could be anywhere near as effective if I adopted a philosophy that I didn't really believe in. You wouldn't see the real me anyway. So I think you've got to try and be as authentic as possible, but also there will be times when there might be one battle that you can't win, and then you've got to decide, I'm willing to lose this one because my overall benefit, will be worth it.
Mm. And you mentioned philosophy there. How would you sort of sum up or describe your sort of playing and coaching philosophy? And I want to sort of go into the foundation phase DNA also. But yeah, how would you sum that up for us, Pete?
Wow. I heard Richard say at the beginning that this is being recorded. I could get sacked now because at some point somebody is going to find out that when I work with kids and coaches, I have more fun than the kids and the coaches, because I just think this whole thing, whatever this is about finding out what people are capable of doing and just introducing them to the joy of learning, just to see how far that can take you. So I think my philosophy is very much based around that. And I hope that comes across when I work with players of whatever age, but also coaches, because I really want them to get whatever they can from these opportunities or these experiences, so that they can feel on a regular basis how I do when I'm working with a group of either coaches or young children.
Yeah, I've just taken some headlines, if you like, off the four corners of the foundation phase. So I just want to go through those boxes, and if you can elaborate. But so the technical box talks about developing their individual skill and ability in possession. I know you talk a lot about sort of staying on the ball, etc. Yeah, if you can elaborate that. And it's just because and I'm with you on it, and it's totally different to myself as a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old or anywhere in that foundation phase as a player. When I cast my mind back, it's totally different. And probably I'm coming from a place of bias, having been in the organisation for 10 years and working with you for a good length of time. But yeah, if you can just elaborate on that for us in that technical box.
The staying on the ball is probably the one statement that is mentioned the most, but also has the potential to be misinterpreted the most, because there is a lot of information, research and depth gone into this one sentence. And I made a conscious choice that I couldn't give all of the coaches all of the stuff that underpinned it. I just gave them the headline, knowing that there would be opportunities over time to add layers and depth to that one statement. But I almost wanted to draw a line in the sand, make it semi-controversial so that it would stick with people. And then that would give me the opportunity, whenever that was presented, for me to delve a little bit deeper into it. If you want young children to fall in love with the game, that involves how they feel when they've got the ball at their feet. So that's the first hook for us as coaches, because the kids come with the potential to love the game that we obviously love so much.
Yeah.
So it's to feed that. Instinctively, they want the ball at their feet, because if you give even a toddler a ball, they will start moving with the ball at their feet.
Yeah.
We also needed to change the paradigm around possession, because possession can be an individual event as well, and yet it was only ever equated as either the number of passes or how long we kept possession for. As an individual player, I can keep possession for my team if I turn really well away from pressure and I can stay on the ball, if I travel with the ball or run with it, or if I dribble with it. If I can add those methods of staying on the ball to passing, then we've got a whole number of ways where we can keep the ball or keep possession for our team. It's not just passing, because if you're a possession team, the real during the pinch points in the game where each individual player might find themselves under pressure or under real defensive or their opponents are putting them under real scrutiny and intense pressure, it's my personal responsibility to keep the ball for the team. So we need to build that first before we open it out to say, right, now 2 of us can keep the ball, and 3 of us, and 4 of us, and 5 of us. So for me, I felt there was a missing link.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think there's a misconception sometimes with that, keeping possession or playing through the thirds. And it's, why is it? What's the purpose? Is it relevant, etc., etc. So talk about the physical corner then. So we start looking into sort of physical literacy and being creative and adaptable and flexible. How does that play a part? Because when that's on the 4 corner board and I see physical, I've just got visions in my head now that in this phase, that when we get out from this lockdown, that I'm just going to be seeing bleep tests everywhere. And people are saying I know, but we need to get our fitness back up. So if you could just elaborate in that box for us, Pete.
If we look at the physical corner, I wouldn't talk about fitness in the foundation phase. What I would talk about is capacity and capability. So we need to build a really broad base of motor skills within our young children. If they specialize in one sport, they will obviously get very good at that sport and the movements involved in that sport. But because they're so young, I would prefer if they were introduced to a whole number of different physical experiences, knowing that later on in their journey, when they get older, they can narrow those off to specialize in whatever sport they want to do anyway. But what they're carrying with them and what's been invested in their physical development is a whole range of physical experiences. And even footballers need that. People used to talk about Ibrahimovic and the variety of goals he used to score. So when they analysed it, he's capable of generating real power when his leg is really in unusual positions. But if you look at his background and his martial arts, he can generate power because his body was exposed to that over a long period. It's not a problem for him, and it's probably quite natural for him. But for you and I, who might not have done it to the same extent, it seems unusual for us to have that capability. Yeah. So I really do like this diversified approach where we specialise later, but take so much more with us in all of the corners.
Yeah, I just wondered if you can sort of enlighten us on what a practice might look like. You talk about sort of dynamic and innovative practices in that corner, and I was looking today, and any of the coaches listening, if you haven't been on the FA Learning YouTube page, I think Rich put it up at the start. Get on there because there's some fantastic webinars. Pete's got a couple of fantastic sessions on there. One of them was hold and release, Pete. I think it is that one, where you talk about sort of compromising their running styles. Just talk about that, because I quite enjoyed that.
Well, it's all based on a concept called differential learning, which is about developing movement variability. So if you run with your hands behind your back, that compromises your running style. So what your body has to do is begin to adapt to running with your hands in that unusual position. So the idea is that if in a game you're ever compromised, your body's already begun to adapt to other ways of moving efficiently, even though for a very short time you can't use your legs how you would normally use them, you can't use your arms how you would normally use them, but your body has been exposed to this variability over a long period of time, so that your ability to adapt is so much better.
Yeah. Would you explain to the players that you're working with why and the reasons why you're working on a certain practice, why you might be compromising their running styles?
Probably not with the players in a physical sense. What I would be talking to them about is this might be difficult, or you might get frustrated, or you're going to think that you can't do this well. It would be more around that psych corner than the physical corner.
Yeah.
I know I have, when we're asking players to hold somebody off,
Yeah.
then your arm is in an unusual position.
Mm.
So we need to get used to our body being used in different ways. And so the more that we can introduce that to the way that we develop our young players, the better I believe that we're equipping them for what might come later on.
Yeah. You mentioned the sight corner there, and I quite like this phrase, this tears, tramps and tantrums. Yeah.
You're talking about me now, aren't you?
Yeah. But going back when I did my prelim, it was kind of get your certificate, go and put some practices on, and that's it. And it's this whole holistic approach that's involved now. Talk about that, Pete. Some of the other things that coaches need to be aware of.
Well, do you know what? If I take just a tiny step back,
yeah,
I know if coaches come to see the DNA roadshows that we put on, what they focus on is the actual practical activity. What they can miss and do miss is what happens between the interactions between myself and the players.
Mm.
And I think some of the things, and this is not blowing smoke up a certain part of my anatomy, but I think that the practical sessions are all wrapped up in the psych and social. And I think I have a radar to spot when things might just be on the verge of going wrong. And so I can almost preempt it and step in. I also think I have the ability to put players at ease so that whatever the challenge is, they're at least willing to have a go.
Yeah.
And that really has nothing to do with the X's and O's on the page. That is about the trust and the relationship and the secure and safe environment that needs to be very quickly established. Because on most occasions, Mark, I work with kids who I don't know. Yeah. So my biggest fear is being eaten alive because I don't know the children. Yeah. Because I think if I knew them over a longer period of time, I'd know all the right buttons to press. But I'm on edge when I do a demonstration because I don't know the children.
Yeah. Do you think that comes with experience, Pete? And whilst you're talking there, I think about when I first started coaching and how uncomfortable it was with the external factors around me, and I was sort of submerged in the session, perhaps in the middle of a group, and I didn't have time to look around and see what was going on, as opposed to just taking a step back and having that period of silence just to enable you to gather your thoughts, and probably more importantly to see if the players have grasped what you've asked them to do.
I can say honestly, with hand on heart, what I focus on now is very different to what I focused on before. My biggest fear when I first started out, and I'm sure this will resonate with most coaches, is the fear of running out of content.
Yeah.
And I would plan hours thinking, I know this is only an hour, but if I run out, what do I do? My default now is, let's introduce players to the game. If I ever run out of content, we play a game, but now I'm experienced enough to make that a really productive and positive substitute for, we all want 1,000,001 sessions.
Yeah.
The best sessions that we can do should be based around the game. And so advice to coaches is begin to focus on other things than the ball, because there's a lot of things going on away from the ball, but also make sure that you introduce the players to the game, and in doing so, you begin to notice relevant things about the players in the game.
Yeah, really good point. So just moving on sort of socially then, we look at the players making friends, being able to deal with disagreements, the ability to interact successfully. I like establishing a healthy relationship to winning or losing also. Just talk about how that came about, devising that social corner.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at our foundation phase DNA resource, we spent hours and hours over a single word or a single phrase because we knew we had a real responsibility to get this right. And I think choosing the right word allows you to begin to communicate the depth and meaning and richness about what your messages are. And the social corner is so important because these are life skills, not just skills, that you use when you're in a team. And I think as much as we had a responsibility in putting the resource together, I think the adults who support grassroots football, and in the professional game, have a real duty to begin to model what great social interactions look like.
Yeah.
Because we can't expect the children to have these abilities refined and ready to be deployed at any given moment. They are learned abilities, and one of the best ways that we can learn them is to model them as coaches, model them as parents, so that they get great examples on a regular basis from which to base their own behaviour around others and within others.
Yeah. I was just thinking then of when I first sort of joined the FA and looking in the four corners and planning the session. I'm going to be totally honest, and in the social box, I think I just had communication, one word, and not even dissected it or looked to sort of delve any deeper. It was just communication, whatever that meant. But there's so many facets, isn't there, to it?
Well, there's a really good friend of mine, Sally Needham, who's doing a lot of work, really excellent work around this area. And one of her key messages is that if the environment is perceived as unsafe by the children, then their stress response system, because it's not fully formed, can cause certain behavioral issues or movement issues or agitations as their only way of coping with their increased stress levels.
Yeah.
So if a coach is not very good technically, but has a great way of providing safe and secure environments, they're going to have a huge impact on the young children anyway. And Sally's work, I think, is groundbreaking, and she's doing a great job. And it totally supports the direction that we want to go in.
Yeah, I spoke to Sally this morning, and we've got something coming out for the tutors pretty soon, and we're hoping to get Sally on this sort of live podcast in the next couple of weeks also. So
that's one not to be missed, because I think it'll allow coaches to really bring our DNA to life. Because if the kids don't engage with it, or they don't feel safe and secure, then we're not going to have the biggest impact upon them with our key messages, because their learning brain is already shutting down, because their stress response is such that it hijacks that learning part of the brain.
Yeah, I mean, what is it from a coach's point of view, Pete? Because is it learned behaviours? Is it those added pressures? Because as an 8-year-old or someone in that foundation phase when I was that age, if you told me to run around the pitch 5 times, I'm going to do it for you. You're the adult, I'm the child. I'll do anything you say. Doesn't mean I'm enjoying the session, because I didn't enjoy it once when I had to do that. What do you think it is? Is it more on our part? Is it more education?
I think we're becoming more aware of it now. I think certainly when I was growing up, anything to do with neuroscience or brain development was in its very early stages. I think we're learning a lot more about how the brain works, and particularly how it works with the body, and how that can either work with teaching and learning or work against it. Because if anybody perceives the situation that they're in as unsafe, their body automatically goes either to fight or flight, or it begins to shut down. And the last thing we want when children come to our sessions is for their learning brain to not get access to all the stuff that we would like to introduce the children to.
Yeah. So I get it. Yeah, it goes to sort of like a default setting, and it might manifest in that player that's constantly bouncing the ball, for instance.
Yeah.
And then that naturally, as a coach, rather than looking at ourselves and looking inside our own tracksuits, we're the one that's pointing the finger and off you go and do a few laps of the pitch.
Yeah. And for some children, their stress response is such that they have to keep moving, or they scratch, or they bounce the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And you saying stop that actually adds to the stress. So we need to really understand and notice and check in with these children, just so that we make sure that pathway to the learning part of their brain is as open and as receptive as possible.
Yeah. Here you go, Pete. I've got nine words for you. You ready? 9 words.
All right. Okay.
Boot it, get rid of it, send it long.
Yeah.
Discuss.
Oh my God. How long have we got?
Whilst you're sort of thinking, there's some words that really haunt me, and they're going to take me back to my sort of youth days. And someone who, you know, I did like to sort of get on the ball, but I just felt that I had it sort of screamed and shouted out of me. And of course, I ended up conforming to what my coach and what the adult wanted me to do. I just thought we could discuss it.
I think as an adult, if someone says to you, this is how I want you to play, and this is why, and it involves all of those things that you've just said, I might not like it, but I can understand it. I think we are being so disrespectful to our young children and the infinite potential that they may have if we use that as our default when they're in the foundation phase, because we're already accepting minimum operating standards and saying, I'm not bothered about what else you might be able to do. We're going to do this. And it just is such a short-term intervention that, for me, has no real benefits at all, certainly in the long run. Even though we know at some point in the World Cup final or the, the UEFA Nations League, if John Stones had just booted that out, we might have had against Holland, we might have had a different outcome. But that's right at the other end of development. We cannot have that as the default for our youngest players because it's disrespectful and it's already settling for minimum operating standards. And I just need to challenge it and try to offer an alternative.
Yeah, some interesting points there, Pete. Just sort of talking about sort of language and jargon. Just give us an idea of some of the words and phrases that you've used. I remember being on a CPD event at SGP, and I think you asked a group of players, do you want to be the attackers or do you want to be the counter-attackers? You know, just that lovely subtle change in words. And I put myself in that situation. If you'd have asked me if I wanted to be a defender, then the shoulders get slumped and the head goes down. But counter-attacker, you know, and I think, you know, things like, can you see both goals? When someone used to scream at me and open out, and at 6, 7, 8, I don't know what you mean by screaming and shouting for me to open out.
Yeah, I think the change of terminology about defending comes with a whole package, because that's underpinned by discussions with the group about, in order for us to do all the great attacking stuff that we love and score all the goals that we want to score, we must be really good at getting the ball off the other team. So it might not be a part that we really like, but the quicker we do it and more effective we do it, then we can get onto all the stuff that we really do like. So I think it was an extension of that. But it was also because I went to a junior club's presentation at the end of the year. And instead of sitting with the coaches, I sat with a group of under-9s on their table. And they were the first group. You know how they have somebody comparing the event, and they said they bring each team up individually. And the coach, who was at the side of this guy who was comparing it, said a little bit about each player. And he called this one boy's name out, and he said, I won't tell you the name, but he says, such a body, defender. And I was sat next to this boy, and the boy said to me, he always calls me a defender. I'm not a defender. I hate being in defence, but he just will not listen. And then obviously the whole table gets up and walks forward. The coach was completely oblivious to this. So I think labelling children, particularly in the foundation phase, because we have no idea where they might end up. I think I can't see the point other than to say this is the way that our team is going to play, and this involves you playing in this area of the pitch, you know. But I think those labels can do as much damage as they can do, you know, give clarity.
This question just has a question mark at the end of it. So, success of the national team since the inception of the England DNA, coincidence? Question mark.
Wow. I think there are too many variables and too many unknowns for us to say there is a direct correlation. But we've been on this journey. I know some of the new coaches will only have been on the journey for a year, 2 seasons, whatever. We've been on this journey for almost 12 years. And in that time, what we've really banged the drum about is developing the technical ability and decision making of our young players, so that if they ever get to represent England at whatever level, we stop other nations looking at our players and saying, yeah, the English players, they're not technically good enough. It was part of this whole issue that we said that cannot happen. If you get beat, you get beat. But it cannot be, because we're now not technically good enough or tactically not good enough. And so it has been over a decade in the making. But you would like to think that along the way, some small difference has been made by, you know, the crusade, in inverted commas, that we've been on. And I say we because it's not me. It's a whole host of people across the game and at all levels of the game. I just happen to be lucky enough to be a spokesman whenever someone gives me the opportunity. But we've got a whole army of people who, you know, are pushing this agenda forward.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I just think prior to that, I couldn't tell you, if you pinned me down, I couldn't tell you what our identity looked like. I know that we would have done sort of recce's in Spain and France, Germany, Italy, Belgium are doing some great things. Let's go and have a look at them. But I think now, especially as a tutor that's sort of going out and delivering this, I think it's a nice foundation and a platform to work from, that we have an identity, a coaching and playing philosophy that we know inside out. So yeah, I think that's good. I think there's one last one from me, and I think if we can bring you back in for maybe some questions, but I just like this phrase, Pete, that players are only young once, so we owe it to them to get it right.
I mean, I've got 4 children. I've got 6 grandchildren, and I want them to be in contact with people who let them know that what they are capable of doing is infinite. Knowing that, you know, anything can change when you get older, but we've got to keep that perspective as wide open as possible. And I just think we get the children in such a magical period of their development and of their lives. We can write something really quite special on what that young person turns into for the rest of their life. And if coaches think that the foundation phase is where you learn your trade, or you use it as a stepping stone to bigger and better things, I'm saying, you know, don't view it in that way. This is a vocation, and it's a fantastic opportunity for you to help young people.
Yeah, I don't know if you were at the CPD event going back some time now at SGP, but there was someone external that came in that asked us, you know, I think he spoke to a class, or someone did, a class of under 5s, and asked for a show of hands of who thought of themselves as an artist. and all the hands went up 100%. It was, and then you get to I think under 11s, and that comes right down to about 5% or something like that. So it's interesting what happens in that period. But Rich, are you there? Have you got any questions for us?
I am. We've got those questions. I'm going to give Pete just a couple of moments to get himself a drink there. We've got some questions, but before we do that, just to what Mark was saying a short time ago about the YouTube channel FA Learning, lots of great content on there, and the boot room. So go and check it out. Rivo's coming out tomorrow, I think, mate. Your podcast, Series 3.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
So Jade Moore's on the first one. So just search Grassroots Football Coach Podcast on all good podcast platforms. Out tomorrow. And coming up next for us tomorrow, we've got the panel, which is Messi versus Ronaldo. I'm interested to see what Mr. Rivers, whose side he's on, and on for that. And if you have missed any sessions, then just head to our website or YouTube page and catch up on the webinars that we've held recently. That leads me to some questions. Go on.
I was just going to say it's an interesting one, that debate tomorrow with Messi and Ronaldo, because you've got we've got Emerson Boyce on the panel, who of course played against Ronaldo.
Yes.
So that'll be interesting.
Interesting. Right, got some questions, loads of questions, Pete. First question that was submitted earlier on Twitter from Elliot was, Pete, do you think the formats in which young players compete against each other at the weekend should be reduced? For example, playing 3v3 at the youngest ages before moving up to 5v5?
This is where I've got to be careful, because it is quite sensitive. We are discussing this issue at the moment, and I'm happy to talk about this as an individual and not an FA employee.
Okay.
But I have presented a whole raft of support, research, and information that backs up what Elliot said, that we have to make sure that we give the children the best possible start. And for that, it has to include the best possible start for fun and enjoyment, for engagement, for involvement, for inclusion, as well as all the technical and tactical things that can come from a change in format as well. I am a big fan of smaller formats, and I think there is room and a need for formats before 5v5. I'll probably get my P45 in the morning, but because it is politically quite sensitive, because it's not that someone makes a decision and then it just rolls out, at the beginning of the next season. It's a lot more complicated than that, but there is a real desire to really examine this issue and then try to come up with the best possible solution for everyone.
Yeah, that was well answered, Pete. Well done. Gary Hindle asks, how many academies and elite settings have taken on board the DNA messages and then implemented them into their coaching syllabus?
If you're talking about the foundation phase DNA or the England DNA key messages in its entirety, then there aren't any. But there are lots that have got similar programs. They might use different words, they might use different key phrases, but there is a huge desire across the professional game to improve the technical, tactical and decision-making ability of all its players. And I think that is what's pleasing. I think as a governing body, we were duty-bound to produce our own. So if somebody wasn't sure what theirs might look like, we could say, well, we think this is best practice based on evidence and research. So here's what we feel. And then we've had lots of clubs who have adopted parts of it, most of it, bits of it, so that we're having an influence across the whole game anyway.
Thank you. Johnny asks, how do you teach players to want to win, but in the environment of long-term development? I'm guilty of talking too much about development. It's okay to lose if we're playing right, but I fear my players are now okay with losing.
I think I think you can teach about winning by showing how players can cope with losing, and that's not like an enigmagram. That's not like a puzzle that you have to solve. I think you can engender a real desire to win. But the whole perspective comes from knowing how to lose with dignity and respect, because you shouldn't lose that desire to win the game. But in modeling how to deal with those situations where, for whatever reason, you don't win, I think that almost ring fences this desire to win, because you're giving it credibility, knowing that if it doesn't happen, we are really well prepared to deal with it effectively and still be a sportsman, still shake the hand of the opposition, even though inside, we're broken.
It's interesting. I've got 2 twin boys. Today I was playing the garden with them. One doesn't mind losing, the other hates losing. So it's a real good challenge for me anyway as a parent. Tony asks, in dealing with parents of youth players that may have unrealistic goals for their child or may have a negative impact on the child's player development, what advice can you give youth coaches in how to properly manage parent behaviour?
I mean, you've got to have an open dialogue, and I think there's really 2 ways that you can deal with parents. Is you can push them away so that they don't bother you. And if you do that, what they're going to do is everything you do or everything you represent, they will begin to fill in the gaps themselves, because nobody's telling them that it's any different. So if you push them away, I would expect a reaction from the parents at some point. My approach would be to bring them closer so that they fully understood your methodology, your philosophy, the way that you wanted to develop their most precious, thing, which is their son or daughter. They obviously want the best for them. The dialogue shows that you also want the best for them as well. So I think keeping that dialogue open is really important. They also need to see the distinction between being a parent and being a parent of somebody who's quite talented at sports. And the research around this area says that those parents who do best when your son or daughter is a talented sports person are disinterestedly interested, because they give all the love, the support and the care, but they don't go through in great detail every game, every decision. They don't have an autopsy about everything that happened. What they do is they go back to the parents who are really supportive and deal with them, moving on. Those are the best parents when your children are involved in sports, because you're there for them, but you are disinterested to the point where they begin to stand on their own 2 feet. Overbearing parents can be a really negative impact on some young sports people, and it's counterproductive to the very thing that they want.
Nice, really good point and good advice again, Pete. Jake asks, what's your biggest challenge you face going back and forth between the very young ages and older groups?
None, because my approach is pretty much the same. The language might be different, the games might be slightly different, but my approach is to engage with the players, try to show that the session is about their development, not me as the coach. And in order to do that, we need full engagement and full involvement from the players. So I've got to try to establish that, and I've got to work with that if the players join me on this journey. So I actually really like the challenge of perhaps working under 8 one night, and then in the past I've gone to the England futsal team for a weekend's camp, and I feel as though I'm still the same person.
Interesting. Daryl asked, going on to the questions that have been just a short time ago, while on the 4 corner topic, how would you deal with a child at grassroots under 12 who gets frustrated during training and matches, not in a nasty way, just having a passion to want to win?
There's not a great deal that you can do in one session other than send out really clear messages that you understand how frustrated he's becoming. So I think you have to validate their feelings. and try to build a connection between you and that player so that they really do think that you understand. And I think that is the starting point. From then, you saying, if you behave in this way, it actually detracts from what you bring to the team and what you're capable of doing. So we need to keep that fire and that desire, but we have to make sure that it doesn't stop you using your superpowers for this team in the way that you are capable of doing. And it can take a year, 2 years, a season, whatever. It's not a quick fix, because you're dealing with trying to change some deeply ingrained, behaviors that are really difficult to change.
Nice. Good. Hopefully it answers or gives you some advice, Daryl, there. Chris Tiley says, is there a situation where you would advocate streaming players within an age group playing in the foundation phase?
I think if you're let's take a grassroots club, and on a Tuesday night, which is what happens locally to us, we have under 8s and under 9s who train on the same night, at the same venue, at the same time. But the thought of putting those two groups of players together and mixed up in any kind of way is almost heresy. And so you can actually stream players on training nights in really creative ways, particularly if you train at the same venue. It just needs us to be quite creative so that we can still provide children with appropriate challenges, either up the ladder or down the ladder, just by the way that we creatively structure training as well as matches. And over a young player's season, I would hope that we can include them in games where it's really tough and they're hanging on with their fingernails, where it's really evenly balanced and it's a real ding dong because it's a close game and everything's quite equal. And then we also need to provide them with opportunities where they actually think, do you know what, this is easy. I can try all my best moves. I might get a shot on goal. I might be able to do this. The children need all of those things over their development. And I think if we can't provide them in matches by streaming teams to play in competitive competitions, we have to be a lot more creative in the way that we do it in training.
That's good. We had a webinar last night and it came up a few times. Hopefully there's a few guys on that tonight, so that can help. Let's go to Lewis Melville, who says, how important will futsal be going forward in the foundation phase and beyond in developing players?
He said he wasn't going to tune in and he wasn't going to ask a question about futsal, but I'm gonna knock this one out the park, because he will know that if I had one wish, it would be that if a young player in the foundation phase said that they wanted to play futsal, we would provide that opportunity. I think it's so critical and so vital for overall development in all corners, and ultimately if they go on to be footballers. I just think it's so important. The Brazilians talk about futsal as their national laboratory of improvisation. So if we want creative, really technical, skillful players, futsal is a great place to start.
I've got an interesting question now from Mark, who said, what is your view on Bayern Munich pushing back the signing of young players to under 11? Is there a potential for this to start an English game? What would be the benefits to the young players, if so?
Yeah, this is my answer. I actually think if the children in Germany go out of the academy system, but are in a school system where they get great PE experiences and opportunities to play lots of different sports, they attend a Bayern Munich development centre with coaches who really understand children, and it's on their doorstep, and they can be with their mates and play in grassroots as well as attend these development centres. I think that's perfect for me. If that's not possible, say in this country, where we seem to recruit children younger and younger, and take them out of that, what I've just described, if our programs in the academies don't reflect that richness of experience and expertise and opportunity, then we might be doing them a disservice. So I think if you have a program for very young children, it's got to reflect what very young children need and not what football thinks it needs. And whether you say no program or yes, we're having a program, you have to meet the needs of the young children at this crucial part of their development and their stage of life.
Cool, good answer again. Daryl asks, with grassroots football likely not to be starting again until after September, maybe even next year, how do you keep the youngsters' appetite for football going?
Is there a thought that children might find lots of other interesting things to do and not come back to football? I mean, that might be the issue. Do you know what? Again, I think this might be quite controversial, but I'm not sure how important we prioritise PE in schools. And I think what this whole situation has created is so much creativity about children being active at home and with their parents and in the garden. I'm part of me is wondering, why is it not a priority when you're in school? You know, that you have these great physical experiences, and you have Joe Wicks doing his stuff. There are other personal trainers who are available, but I think some of the kids are getting such a great experience. In some ways, it might fire them up. They're also getting lots of opportunity to post themselves practicing on their own, or with their dad, or with their mum, or with their brother and sister. I think we need to keep that going as an important part of their development, because it brings the family together, and it's a great thing to do as a family. But it also increases the number of touches on the ball, the number of hours they're practicing, and all of that can accumulate over a long period of time. So I'm not too worried that, you know, the kids won't come back absolutely bursting the doors down to be involved in football again. We've got to make sure that when they do come back, we've got a product that is ready and right for them when they burst the doors down.
We had again on another webinar a few weeks ago talking about there's hopes of people that football might become better when it comes back, because we've missed it for so long that maybe it's not all about the score and it's all about enjoyment and development.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this the other day, and I think rather than, if the season starts in whenever, that instead of going straight back into the leagues are re-established, you know, that everything just goes back to normal, we have a period of time where we actually celebrate coming out of lockdown, and we're all involved back in football. And it doesn't have to be competitive, but it's a real celebration of the fact that we can now meet together, train together, play against different people, but it's a celebration of the game of football.
Yeah, fingers crossed, mate. Hopefully it's sooner rather than later. But Elliot, I've got two left for you, Pete, and you've done really well so far. It's top off on the water. Elliot's asked, when you plan a session, do you focus on a topic, for example, playing out from the back, or focus on things like staying on the ball, combining creativity or creatively, etc.?
Right. I have a topic in mind always, but they're quite broad, and they can be quite obscure, because it could be a topic about problem solving, and so I always plan in detail, and I think that's a good habit to get into. And I always, during that planning, think, if I was a young player in this practice, would I enjoy it? And if I thought, nah, there's not enough excitement, I'm not getting enough touches of the ball if I'm on that team, or if with this rule it could cause this, then I'll start again. And then when I've got those like key things in place, I'll then think more about, right, what are the key points I want to make, and how do I want to bring this alive for the kids so that they're really keen to know more about whatever topic it is. So I also look at if I was a player in this, how could I cheat? Because you don't want to have to deal with players cheating in the moment, because because I plan for it. As soon as somebody, because kids are quite creative, as soon as they say get round the rule or get round a condition, like can we do this, I'll already have the next one that's closing that door, because I don't have to deal with it on the spot and suddenly try to think of something. So those two things help me. I've also gone into sessions where I've said to the children, we're going to work on something tonight, but I'm not going to tell you what it is, but when I see it, I'm going to let you know. And so we play a game, and I might suddenly say, oh, you've just done it. And then you can see the kids thinking, what did he do? What did he do? And I say, oh, you nearly did it. Oh, that you've just done it. And then we bring them in, and suddenly they're all saying, it's this, it's that. And instead of me saying, right, tonight we're going to do a topic on, I've tried to bring it alive for the kids so that it becomes them, because they've just discovered what it is.
That's decent. And Elliot says, excellent answer, Pete. But I've got one more. It's a very long question, so hopefully I might be able to break it down. This is from Scott Mowbray. I know Scott's on the call, so thanks, Scott, for the essay. But let me see if I get through it. It says, with all the great work the FA and Pete are doing to help improve grassroots coaching and training at the foundation phase, what more can the FA and Pete do to help improve the players' matchday experience and move the overwhelming focus away from results to development? There is more, but we'll just focus on that in a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how controversial this is, but I don't think the focus should move completely away from competition to development. I think the two can be managed successfully, but it requires coaches to adopt a slightly different approach. If theirs is a win at all costs approach, it also needs the backing of parents who really set the tone for whatever environment is created around the matches anyway. So I think the adults involved have to be better role models at showing the young children what it's like and how it can feel when you are in a competitive environment, but you still know how to be sporting and respectful regardless of the result. And I think it's more down to us rather than change it, because competition is a fact of life. And I'd rather get better at dealing with it rather than push it into the corner so that nobody ever has to.
That's good. Scott, you'll hopefully make that answers your question. Definitely, I can understand that more now. Definitely, mate. So thanks, Pete. River, that's all the questions, mate. I'm sure there's loads more, but I don't want to take any more of Pete's time.
No, thank you, Pete. It's just yeah. It's fascinating. I've just got one left from me, Pete, and that's if you could give one message to any of our coaches out there that are sort of continuing on their journey, what would that message be? Bit of a generic one, but
yeah, wow.
What would it be?
I think it comes from watching a coach, and I got a really distinct feeling that he did not enjoy the company of the young people who were sat in front of him. And you can try to hide it, but eventually the kids will work you out. So I think if you are working with young children, you've got to really develop the skills around teaching and learning, because you have to get good at structuring the learning and anchoring it to previous content and really knowing where the journey is going to take the children. You have to be good at that, but you have to really care for the children and enjoy their company. Yeah. And you mentioned some of the coaching videos on the FA's YouTube channel. If you notice, I probably laugh more than the kids, because I just see what they do and I'm just infected by it, and I'm thinking, this is great. And I want the kids to feel like that, because I feel like that every time I step on the grass with them. So it's great for me. That's my Labrador, by the way.
Good timing.
He's making a guest appearance.
Yeah. Brilliant. Rich, I think we're done.
That's it. I just want to thank you, Pete, so much, obviously, giving us your time here. It's been great. We've had over 50 people on throughout the whole the last hour and a bit. So thank you.
Well, I
Yeah,
hope I
thanks
haven't
ever
said
so much.
anything that's going to cause me to lose my job, but I
I'm
think
sure
too
you haven't.
often we sit on the fence, and I'm happy to just say, look, this is what I would really like, or this is what I believe in. So, but I know that can cause some issues. So, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah,
No problem at all.
brilliant. Cheers, Pete. Thank you very much.
Thank you, mate.
Hopefully
Take
we'll
care,
see you
everyone.
soon.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.